Hey, wait! The words left Collins Brown's mouth before he even realized he'd stood up. Through the rain-streaked glass of the five-star restaurant, a small boy was pressed against the window, his face half hidden by water and hunger. The world outside blurred in gray, but the child's wide eyes cut through the storm like light through smoke. The boy couldn't have been more than 6. His jacket hung off him like borrowed skin, and his shoes, one untied, one broken, were soaked through. Inside, crystal chandeliers hummed above silk-draped tables. Collins's untouched soup steamed softly in front of him, its warmth mocking the sight beyond the glass. For a man who lived his life behind tinted windows and private jets, the scene outside felt almost unreal, like poverty had wandered into his carefully insulated universe by mistake. "Should I call security, sir?" the waiter asked, already frowning toward the door. Collins hesitated. His instinct was to nod, to maintain the invisible walls that had always protected him from scenes like this. But when the boy's small hand pressed against the glass, his fingers leaving streaks on the cold pane, Collins's chest tightened. "No," he said finally. "Let him in." The maitre d' hurried over, voice polished and firm. "Mr. Brown, this isn't proper. Guests might find it," I said. "Let him in," Collins repeated, sharper this time. Gasps rippled across the dining room. A few heads turned, forks paused midair. As the door opened, a blast of cold rain swept through the warmth, and the boy stepped inside, small, dripping, and silent. He stopped just short of the table, eyes on the soup. "Hungry?" Collins asked. The boy nodded but didn't move. "I can't," he murmured. "Mom said no food we can't pay for." From his backpack, he pulled out a single crumpled dollar bill and a toy car missing one wheel. "This is all I got." Collins blinked, unsure whether to laugh or look away. "Keep it," he said quietly. "The food's yours." The boy hesitated again. "You sure? People get mad when I ask." Something in that small, matter-of-fact voice struck deeper than it should have. Collins felt it, a crack somewhere beneath the surface of his composure. He watched the boy finally lift the spoon, his hands shaking so badly that broth spilled down his wrist. Still, he didn't complain. He just whispered, "Thank you," so softly it barely reached the table. No one in the restaurant spoke. The only sound was rain against the glass, and the quiet collapse of a man's indifference. Collins leaned back, the noise of the city outside fading into memory. He couldn't stop staring at the boy, or the tiny toy car resting beside the bowl. He didn't know yet that the name written on the back of that toy would unravel his entire empire. But that moment, the sight of a hungry child in the rain, was the beginning of everything that came after. Margaret, Collins's assistant, arrived with her usual brisk efficiency, a tablet tucked under her arm and rain still clinging to her coat. Her voice, crisp and composed, broke the quiet tension that had settled over the table. "Sir, you called?" Collins didn't look up immediately. He was watching Ashley finish the last spoonful of soup, his small hand steady now, though his clothes still clung to him like wet paper. The boy set the spoon down carefully, almost ceremoniously, as if afraid of breaking something too fine to touch. "This is Ashley," Collins said at last. "Find out where he came from. Who's looking for him?" Margaret's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to her employer, her professional calm faltering for the briefest second. "Yes, sir." Ashley straightened in his chair. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "Mom's coming soon. She always does." His certainty struck Collins harder than pity ever could. The waiter returned with a towel and a steaming cup of cocoa, but Ashley shook his head. "I can't drink that," he murmured. "Why not?" Collins asked. The boy hesitated, reaching for the small, torn backpack by his feet. He unzipped it and carefully drew out a single crumpled dollar bill and a scratched toy car missing one wheel. He laid them side by side on the table as if they were treasures. "Mom said we don't take things we can't pay for." "I have this," he said simply, pushing the dollar toward Collins. "It's enough for the soup, right?" Collins stared at the dollar, his throat tightening. The edges were soft and worn, the kind that had passed through too many desperate hands. For a moment, he couldn't speak. All the language of profit and numbers he'd mastered over decades suddenly felt meaningless. "Keep it," he managed. "And the cocoa." "Both of them." Ashley hesitated again until Collins picked up his own cup and took a sip first. Only then did the boy lift his, smiling faintly as steam fogged his glasses. Rain pattered against the glass beside them, tracing thin silver lines down the window. Collins found himself staring at his reflection, blurred, distorted by the water, and realized, with quiet unease, that for the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking back. But before we begin, click subscribe, like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to the story. Margaret returned later that afternoon, her usual confidence dimmed. She carried a manila folder pressed tight against her chest, her expression unreadable. Collins looked up from his untouched coffee, the air between them heavy with unspoken questions. Ashley sat nearby, tracing circles on the fogged window with one small finger. "Well?" Collins asked. His voice was softer than usual, but it carried an edge of impatience. Margaret hesitated. "Before I tell you, sir, the boy gave me this." She reached into her coat pocket and handed over a small, water-stained photograph. Collins took it carefully. The picture showed a young woman in a faded janitor's uniform, her smile warm despite the weariness in her eyes. She had Ashley's same hopeful gaze. Scrawled on the back, in faint ink, were two words, Grace Peter. "That's my mom," Ashley said from the booth, his tone bright with trust. "She works in a big building. She said she cleans the shiny floors." Collins exchanged a glance with Margaret, who lowered her eyes. "Sir," she began quietly, "Grace Peter has been missing for nearly 3 weeks. I contacted local authorities. They closed the case, lack of leads." The words sank in like stones. Collins felt something twist inside him. "Missing?" Margaret nodded. "She was last employed at the Harding Relief Foundation." The name hit him like a slap. His own foundation, his signature on every document, his speeches about corporate compassion. The charity had been designed to help single mothers, not erase them. "Was she fired?" he asked, though he already knew it wouldn't be that simple. "Her record says, terminated, policy violation." Margaret's tone wavered. "But there's no detail. Just a date. The day she disappeared." Collins's pulse quickened. He glanced at Ashley, who had fallen asleep in the corner booth, the toy car clutched in his hand. Rain tapped softly against the window, steady and relentless. He leaned back in his chair, the photograph trembling slightly in his fingers. The smiling woman in the picture no longer looked like a stranger. She looked like an accusation. "What have I built?" he whispered, more to himself than to Margaret. The rain outside answered for him, quiet, merciless, and unending. Collins sat alone in his office long after the city lights had blurred into streaks across the glass. The storm had quieted, but inside him, something louder was stirring. Margaret's report lay open before him, pages of ledgers, invoices, and transfer receipts that didn't add up. He clicked through digital records on his laptop, eyes narrowing. Millions of dollars earmarked for family shelters had vanished, rerouted through shell organizations and consulting fees. Some recipients didn't even exist, fake names, fake addresses, whole neighborhoods that led to nothing but empty lots. At the top of every document sat the same embossed logo, the Harding Relief Foundation. And beneath it, his own digital signature. Collins rubbed his temple, memories flickering back, years of board meetings where he'd nodded absently, rubber-stamped reports without reading, speeches about philanthropic transparency he'd never written himself. He'd built an empire so vast that his own negligence had become its foundation. The deeper he went, the uglier it became. One name kept reappearing, Reed Wallace, project director. Trusted, competent, praised for efficiency. Collins had hired him personally 5 years ago. The man had turned a charity into a machine for siphoning money, hiding behind the respectability of the billionaire who never asked questions. Then Collins opened Grace Peter's employment file. The words were simple, clinical, terminated for insubordination. But the attached note chilled him, repeatedly questioned allocation of housing funds. He stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Grace hadn't been defiant, she'd been brave. She'd seen what he had chosen not to see. For the first time in years, shame burned hotter than anger. His empire had devoured the very people it claimed to help. And somewhere out there, a woman who'd tried to stop it had disappeared because of it. Collins turned toward the couch in his office, where Ashley slept under a folded blanket. The boy's small hand rested over the toy car, the same one that had sat beside the soup bowl. He watched him for a long moment, then closed the laptop and whispered, "I'll find her myself." The words weren't a vow, they were a reckoning. Chapter 5, The Night of Truth. The city was a blur of rain and light beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Collins's penthouse. Midnight had come and gone, but sleep refused him. The storm outside rolled low and heavy, thunder breathing against the glass like a reminder of everything he'd ignored. Ashley slept on the couch, small and peaceful beneath a borrowed blanket. The boy's toy car rested on his chest, glinting faintly in the soft lamp glow. Collins watched him for a long while, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, the quiet sound of innocence untouched by the weight of truth. He turned back to his desk. The computer screen glowed pale blue in the dark, file names stretching endlessly down the page. He searched through internal records of the Harding Relief Foundation, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Dozens of folders hid behind layers of permissions he'd never thought to question before. Then he saw it, Grace Peter, relocated with consent. Collins opened the document. His stomach turned. The file listed Grace as rehomed to a partnering facility, but no address was given. The The signature beneath the consent line, her name, in neat cursive, wasn't hers. The handwriting was too careful, too practiced. He leaned closer, pulse thudding in his ears. On the corner of the digital form was another signature, Reed Wallace's. The realization hit him with the weight of years. It wasn't bureaucracy that had swallowed her, it was the system he'd built, the one that used compassion as a mask. She didn't vanish, he murmured, voice hoarse. We buried her with paperwork. The words hung in the air, cold and final. Collins pushed away from the desk and walked toward the window. Below him, the city glittered like broken glass, each light a fragment of something he once believed in. His reflection stared back at him, lined and hollow, framed by wealth that now looked like rot. Behind him, Ashley stirred in his sleep, clutching the toy car tighter. Collins turned, watching him with a mix of sorrow and resolve. I'll find her, he whispered. No matter what it costs. The storm answered with a low rumble, as if the night itself had heard his vow. Morning crept slowly through the penthouse windows, pale light cutting through the haze of another sleepless night. Collins sat hunched at his desk, the untouched coffee beside him gone cold hours ago. He was reading the same document for the 5th time when the doorbell rang. Margaret opened the door before he could rise. A man stood there, older, his shoulders bent under the weight of something heavier than years. His security badge, faded and cracked, still hung from his jacket pocket. Mr. Brown, the man said quietly. Name's Harold Finch. Used to work security at the Harding Foundation sites. I shouldn't be here, but, he hesitated, eyes darting toward Ashley, who was sitting at the kitchen counter eating cereal. Some things ain't right, sir. And I can't keep quiet no more. Collins gestured him inside. Harold reached into his coat and placed a small flash drive on the desk. This is from the night Grace Peter went missing. I kept a copy. They wiped the archive soon after. Collins plugged it in, dread knotting in his chest. The video flickered to life, a dimly lit construction site, time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. Grace stood near the edge of the frame, arguing with Reed Wallace. Her gestures were desperate, pleading. Reed's expression hardened. In the next moment, he grabbed her arm and shoved her toward a white company van. The headlights flared, and the screen went black. Collins froze. For a long time, he said nothing. Then his hands clenched, the sound of his knuckles cracking louder than the rain outside. Where was this taken? He demanded. Site D, sir. The new housing project. She never came back. Collins stared at the blank screen, his reflection flickering in the monitor's glow. Rage burned hot in his veins, but beneath it lay something colder, shame. Reed's cruelty had thrived under his blindness. He reached for his phone. Margaret, get my lawyer. Tell him I want a meeting with Reed Wallace, today. At La Fontaine. The restaurant, sir? She asked. Yes, he said. The same one where it all began. After Harold left, Collins played the video again. Grace's voice was faint under the static, but the fear was unmistakable. Justice starts here, he whispered. And this time, he meant it. La Fontaine glowed as it always did, warm light, soft jazz, silver cutlery reflecting quiet wealth. But to Collins, the place felt different now. The gold-veined marble floors and polished glasses no longer whispered elegance, they reeked of complicity. This was where he'd first seen Ashley in the rain. This was where everything had begun. Reed Wallace arrived right on time, his confidence as crisp as his tailored suit. Collins, he greeted, sliding into the seat across from him. Didn't expect such a dramatic invitation. What's this about? Collins didn't bother with pleasantries. He slid a tablet across the table. The screen came alive, grainy footage, a night lit by construction floodlights. Reed's smirk faded as he watched himself grab Grace Peter by the arm, forcing her toward a white van. The restaurant's soft music drowned under the weight of silence. You used my name to steal their lives, Collins said, voice low but steady. My foundation. My money. My trust. Reed leaned back, jaw tightening. You think I did this alone? You signed the checks. You looked the other way. His smile returned, thin and venomous. You never asked what we did with your money, Collins. Don't start acting holy now. The words hit like a slap, but Collins didn't flinch. The shame was already there, he'd carried it for weeks, and it no longer frightened him. Maybe I didn't ask, Collins said. But I'm asking now. Reed reached for his napkin, pretending calm. You have no proof that woman didn't just run off. The footage could be doctored. The sudden flash of blue lights outside cut him off. Police sirens wailed, echoing faintly through the restaurant glass. Reed turned sharply toward the window, panic flickering across his composed mask. Collins stood, nodding toward the 2 plainclothes detectives approaching from the entrance. That's where you're wrong, he said quietly. I brought proof. And they've seen it. Reed tried to rise, but the officers were already at his shoulders. Silver cuffs clicked shut with finality. From a corner booth, Ashley looked up, wide-eyed. "Did you find my mom?" he asked softly. Collins met his gaze, voice steady now. "I will, Ashley. I promise." And for the first time in his life, Collins felt he was fighting for something that truly mattered. The clinic was small, tucked between fields of rust-colored earth and whispering pines. The air smelled of disinfectant and rain-soaked soil. Collins stepped through the doorway, his heart hammering, Ashley's small hand gripping his. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a countdown. A nurse led them to a dimly lit room at the end of the hall. "She's weak," she said softly, "but she's alive." Grace Peter lay on a narrow bed, her frame frail beneath a thin blanket. Her face was pale, but when her eyes fluttered open and fell on the boy beside Collins, they brightened with disbelief that melted into tears. "Mommy!" Ashley broke free from Collins's grasp and ran to her, sobbing as he threw his arms around her neck. "I waited, Mommy. I waited like you said." Grace's trembling hands cupped his cheeks. She couldn't speak, her voice cracked under the weight of emotion, but her tears said what words couldn't. She pulled him close, holding on as if afraid he might disappear again. Collins turned away, his throat tightening. For weeks, he had lived in cold light, documents, evidence, vengeance, but this was life. The reunion shattered something inside him, the last remnant of the man who once measured worth in numbers. He covered his face with one hand and exhaled, the sound breaking between guilt and relief. He'd spent his life building towers of glass. Now, for the first time, he felt the ground beneath him. 3 days later, the world knew. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire exposes his own corruption. Missing woman found alive." At the press conference, cameras flashed like lightning. Collins stood at the podium beside Grace and Ashley, the boy clutching his mother's hand. His voice was steady but stripped of all grandeur. "My name built the Harding Foundation," he said. "But her strength built what my money never could." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he announced the transfer of his personal trust, every dollar, to rebuild the foundation as the Grace Peter Fund. When the applause rose, Grace reached out and squeezed his hand. No words, no speeches, just quiet forgiveness that washed through him like sunlight after a storm. For the first time, Collins believed in redemption. The sun broke through the morning clouds as people gathered in front of the newly renovated building. A sleek sign gleamed above the entrance, the Grace Peter Foundation for Families. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing, while children played near the steps. What had once been the symbol of corruption was now a beacon of healing. Collins stood between Grace and Ashley, the weight of the moment settling quietly over him. It wasn't pride he felt, it was peace. The building behind them had been rebuilt with honesty, with hands that once trembled under injustice but now shaped hope. When the crowd hushed, the mayor stepped forward with a golden pair of scissors. But Collins gently stopped him. "No ribbons today," he said, his voice calm. "We'll open this place the way it was saved." He turned and handed the microphone to Grace. She looked out over the audience, journalists, social workers, and families who had once been left unseen by the very system that was supposed to protect them. Her voice, soft at first, carried farther than anyone expected. "For years," she began, "we were invisible. We worked, we prayed, and we waited for someone to notice. And one day, a man looked up from his table and saw us. That simple act changed everything." A quiet murmur moved through the crowd, followed by applause that grew until it filled the courtyard. Collins's chest tightened. He looked down at Ashley, who stood proudly beside his mother, holding a small bowl of soup, a deliberate echo of that first night in the restaurant. Ashley grinned up at him. "We saved it for you," he said. Collins knelt, taking the spoon. Together, they shared the meal, surrounded by people who now had names, stories, and futures. The soup was warm, simple, and real, the kind of thing that never appeared on his billion-dollar menus but had somehow fed his soul. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft and steady. The crowd didn't scatter, they lifted their faces to it, smiling. Collins looked through the drizzle at the boy and the woman who had rewritten his life. They weren't strangers anymore. They were the proof that compassion could rebuild anything, even a man's heart. Thank you for watching till the end. Click subscribe and let me know the lessons you learned in the comment below, and turn on the notification bell because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it.